facilities and these unions to provide better lives for their family, a future for their children. And we ask that you just continue to watch over every person represented here and everyone who's unable to attend. And we thank you for all that you are going to continue to do in our lives. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Charmaine. It's now my honor to introduce our Lieutenant Governor, Kathy Hochul, who's come a long way to be here today.
And indeed, it is great to be home. Thank you, Denise, for the invitation to participate, even only for a few moments, to pay homage to my friends in the labor community. First of all, to you for your extraordinary leadership through some of the toughest times our men and women have ever had to encounter. The workplace became a place of danger for many. People who had to go into hospitals and work in grocery stores and work in transit and go to their jobs in the factories, not knowing whether the person next to them could be spreading a virus that they could bring home to their loved ones. This was the most challenging year in 100 years since the last pandemic. But I'll tell you my reflections, Denise, and to you and to Dick and to Peter and all the leaders of this labor community. When we needed you most, labor showed up. You showed up at great risk to yourselves, with your own fears and your own anxieties, but you overcame that because you knew you had a job to do. And Charmaine talked about one value. She talked about gratitude in her invocation. My prayer is that after this horrific year of loss, we lost 11 people this year, 11 friends, 11 members of the labor community, 11 sons and daughters and brothers and sisters who are now mourning not having them here for Memorial Day services or the summer events or Labor Day. I hope that the takeaway from this year is that there'll be a forever ingrained in our hearts a gratitude that was missing for too long. For too long, people took for granted the work that is being done by all of you and the workers you represent. The grocery workers, the bus drivers, the nurses running into hospitals when it was so much safer for them to be sitting home with their own children. Never again will we look at any of them, any of our brothers and sisters in labor, whether they're working on a factory, keeping the production lines going, or out there in the streets. They protected the rest of us. They protected those who had the luxury of sitting in front of their home computers on a Zoom call, probably the safest place in the last 15 months. The rest of you showed up. And I and 20 million New Yorkers will never forget that. Thank you very much for the sacrifices. I want to recognize the elected officials who joined us here today. Mark Poloncarz, you were a brother during this. We had so many conversations during COVID. Every single day for months, we had daily calls with Mark and Dick representing the labor community day after day after day, asking questions, pressing us to make sure we got it right. But Mark Poloncarz, your legacy will be that you helped save lives in Western New York, and I want to thank you for that. And our district attorney, who's out there also protecting all of us so we can sleep more soundly at night. And to all the local officials that I had the pleasure to represent, and one of them is joining us now, our great Congressman Brian Higgins. All of you had roles to play, but going forward, the takeaway of 2020 will be, we will never forget the sacrifices of the labor community. We will honor you, give you the respect you deserve, the pay you deserve, the benefits you deserve, and the compensation for what you've gone through. Mark my words, you are owed that. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very, very much, Lieutenant Governor. It is now my pleasure to introduce, he just got here, which is wonderful, our Congressman Brian Higgins.
Thank you very much. Yes. Rich. Timing's everything. Timing's everything. Our great elected officials here, and our great Lieutenant Governor, and everybody from organized labor. This is a special event whereby we recognize workers who have died on a very important weekend It's unofficially the start of summer, but it's a time of reflection for the great history that organized labor has played in this community. You know, Congress approved the PRO Act, a very important piece of legislation, most progressive labor rights legislation in the past 80 years. It undermines 27 states, the so-called right to work state. I call it right to exploit states. And it encourages and strengthens the ability of organized labor in every community throughout this nation to fight for the rights of individuals. And where have all this come from? Congress approved it in March of 2021, and 110 years ago, there was a fire in Greenwich Village in New York City called the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. 146, mostly women, were killed. They were on the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th floor, and the building was set ablaze. They couldn't get out because all the doors were locked and the fire escapes were locked. So they either burned to death or they jumped, they leapt to their death. It was the worst industrial fire in the history of the nation at that time. But what resulted was the most progressive worker rights legislation, 32 major pieces of legislation approved by the New York State Legislature, lobbied by Frances Perkins, first woman labor secretary in the history of the United States, pushed by Al Smith, the governor of the state. A great, great time, a great, great moment out of the ashes of that terrible tragedy to reaffirm the rights of workers. In 1955, before we had South Bend, had Mayor Pete, we have Labor Pete. But there was a young guy from Buffalo in 1955 who was from the Bricklayers Union. He was also the president of the Buffalo Federation of Labor before the merger of the AFL-CIO. His name was Jack Higgins. He was 35 years old in December. He went to New York City, Madison Square Garden, to represent the working folks of this community to vote on the merger of the AFL-CIO, which created the greatest, largest labor organization in the history of this world. In the history of this world. Young, handsome, charismatic guy. Comes back, all kinds of speculation about Jack Higgins. He was going to be the first AFL-CIO president. Comes back, my Uncle Jim picks him up at the airport, my dad's brother, they're all bricklayers, and says, Jack, you have to tell us what it is you want to do. There's all kinds of speculation that you're going to be mayor of Buffalo, governor of the state of New York. He said, Jim, I don't want any of that. I want to go to Washington and represent the working people of this community in Congress. Well, he never made it. He died a week later at the age of 35, suddenly of a heart attack. So the reason I tell you that, it's not my story, it's all of our stories. And ours is that of the Exodus story. You know, we achieved great things coming over the waters, over the deserts, over the mountains, to the promised land, to a place of hope and opportunity. And now we have Labor Pete, takes over from the Zen master, Rich Lipsitz, 9 years as president of the AFL-CIO. What a great, great guy. The Zen master, he's an author, and just a great, 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 great job. And think about it, still today, 15 million people are associated with unions. 25% are women. 28% are African American. First minority president of the AFL-CIO here in Western New York. He's a Hispanic and African American. 6 kids. 6 kids. He's a union journeyman. Not one union, not 2 unions, not 3 unions, but 4 unions. And a proud union guy. He calls himself a blue-collar lunch bucket. Labor leader. So this is a great celebration at a solemn time. We thank you for many things. I thank you for the opportunity that you give me to represent this extraordinary community in the United States Congress. We thank Labor Pete and Zen Rich for the good work that they have done and the good work that they'll continue to do, only for the good, hard-working labor people in this community. And on this weekend, the beginning of Memorial Day, we thank goodness for a good and generous nation that makes this day and all of our days possible. Thank you for including me.
Thank you, Congressman Brian Higgins. We've just acquired 2 new names, didn't we? That's sticking. It definitely is.
We'll see about that.
Yeah. I love it.
Okay, Zen Master.
Yeah. I'd also like to introduce our Erie County Executive, Mark Poloncarz, to say a couple words.
Thank you, Deb, and thank you for your service to the community. I just want to remind everybody that the only reason we're here today is because of each and every one of us and your members of your unions who worked so hard in some ways for the last year and 3 months. It was an experience, as I was talking with others beforehand, that we maybe really haven't come to grips with what exactly happened. And on behalf of the people of Erie County, I want to thank you for the tremendous work and effort that each of you put in. Even if it was what you might not normally have thought of as work, because what we went through is an experience that 20, 30 years from now, we will relay to others who didn't live through it, to say how traumatic an experience this was to our community, to our country, and to the world. I may have been the face on television every day, but there were people on the front lines who were putting their lives at risk, and that's what we're here to talk about, because there are people in our community who are on the front lines in healthcare and other fields who caught COVID from their jobs and died in the past year. 3 more people died of COVID in Erie County hospitals on Monday. Every day people are still passing. In almost every situation, none of them are vaccinated. So please, get vaccinated. But I bring that up because this was a traumatic year. When we talk about the loss and the names that